All right, my name's Andrew.
My name is Catherine.
All right, we're going to talk about some books.
All right. So the book I read was by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me. Generally, this book was written as like a very long letter to his son. Like all 152 pages of this are a letter that he's writing to his son. And it basically covers like from the beginning. It starts talking about his life growing up in, I believe, Baltimore. And he is talking about sort of like life on the streets. Growing up, how there's like a specific way that you're supposed to act. Mm-hmm. And then from that, it starts morphing. It sort of follows like a linear chronological progression of him as a child, sort of like expectations, what the world is like teaching him to believe. And he goes to Howard University once he starts going to college. And he calls it the Mecca throughout the book because he believes that it's like, to him it was a place where he really believed he could, sorry, I'm like just tripping over my words right now. He saw it as a place where he could find other people with like similar interests. It was like a HBCU, so of course it's like he gets to find a whole variety of people who are who are embracing their traditional like African roots, people who have like Jamaican roots, people who converted to Islam, like a whole host of people. Mm-hmm. Talks about the girls he meets there, talks about his experiences there, and as he gets older, he starts talking about what it was like to have his kid, his fears for his kid growing up in America, and towards the end, he talks about his trips to Europe, sort of. One of the biggest parts of this is his friend Prince, who was killed by the Prince George County, I believe it is, police in Washington, D.C. They followed him up to Virginia, and they killed him, which was a very tragic and traumatizing circumstance for Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so, like, that's just, like, the basic progression of the letter that he's writing to his son. All of it is, like, those are, like, the different timeline parts. But overall, there is, like, a huge theme of disembodiment and the body. And, of course, this is a book about race. So Ta-Nehisi Coates is talking about how when he was younger, he grew up very hyper-aware of his race. And he would talk about how things like watching white children on TV just sit in their rooms, talk about wanting to date the popular girl at school. Those kind of things felt so unreal to him because he was living in a different kind of reality. Yeah. Like he called it like a different universe away from things. And so part of that is like he says that he never would have seen himself going to France. He never understood why he took French as a child because he thought that would never be a reality for him. Mm-hmm. And so talks about black bodies. And one of the biggest parts of it is he's saying that it's sort of like white people are able to sort of like take their body away from them. So like with police brutality, with enslavement, with a whole host of other things, with Jim Crow era racism, it's like they're taking their body away from them when they commit acts of violence against them. Yeah. And so that's like all throughout the book, he's talking about our bodies. Someone can take your body away from you. Someone can give your body to you, like when you're born. Very interesting. And one of the big themes he gets into about like a quarter or 3/4 of the way through the book is disembodiment, and talking about like the ways that you can feel disembodied as a black person in America. And he really addresses sort of like systemic racism, where it comes from. Towards the end of the book is actually when he starts getting into concepts of slavery and how, this was like a deeply rooted issue. He brings it up towards the beginning a little bit, but he really starts like going into depth on it towards the end, where he's talking about how slavery is sort of like the root of this country. This is something that happened when this country was founded, so you can't just like easily get rid of that. And racism is obviously something that still exists today, and it's still really felt, of course. Yeah. And he's talking about different things, sort of. I really wish I only started bookmarking like I guess halfway through the book, but there was this really great part towards the beginning where he's discussing that like you can either master two things as a child, like an African American child, and it is sort of you either have to master the schools or you get lost, or you have to master the streets or you get lost, and you have to master one or the other, or it's like you sort of have nowhere to go. And so he was talking about, for him, he kind of wasn't able to master either, but he ended up like sort of finding his way through life anyways. But he like, it's so hard for me to even like accurately convey everything he covers in this book, because he's a poet and the way he describes it is so beautiful, and each paragraph feels like it's saturated with meaning. Mm-hmm. So in some parts he speaks about I guess like, sorry, I'm like losing track because I'm like going here and there and everywhere. Okay. But he like discusses like growing up with that, going to Howard, meeting this guy Prince who ended up getting killed by the police, and it was a mistaken identity. They mistook him for a different perpetrator. I think Prince was like 5'10" or 6 feet tall or something like that, and then the perp that they were looking for was like 5'3". All these sorts of things. It's very tragic. He's talking about sort of like what kind of culture he wants to raise his son in, mm-hmm. and how he was sort of raised in fear, and he doesn't want his son to be raised in a similar type of fear. He wants his son to feel more free, feel more comfortable in his body, and not have to fear people taking his body away from him. And I'm trying to think of what else. There's just like, again, there's just so much to this book that they cover. He covers like his conversation with Prince's mom. He covers sort of like the Black women he's got to know as he's grown up, what he admires about them, what their own different plights are, because, you know, Black women face like different challenges than Black men. Yeah. And it's really poignant. It's a really beautiful book, and I would honestly 100% recommend you to read it, because it's a pretty short read, and it was just like, I don't know, it was a great book. I'll like go into it a little bit more later in the parts that I bookmarked and mm-hmm. different things that I found great. But
yeah, so I envy you because you really enjoyed your book. I did not have a good time with my book. Which I have voiced in class a few times. There's a lot of good stuff in here, but the validity of the author is a big question mark to me. So I have mm-hmm. The Spark, Mother's Story of Nurturing Genius and Autism by Christine Barnett. And this book is, I'd say it's about 30% like very profound advice and about raising a child with autism. And there's some really incredible content in here. You know, the kid Jake Barnett, who is Christine's son. You know, like your book, it's not as much a letter to him, but it's an account of her son's life. But where I start to struggle with it is there's times where it's more about how amazing of a mother Christine is versus how amazing of a son that Jake is. But before I complain about that, Jake it's an incredible story. He's a really incredible kid, you know, that describes on the back. He has an IQ higher than Einstein, just a genius prodigy child that was faced at a very young, he faced it, but it was from his mom and dad's accord. Was, you know, preschool, ages 3, 4, 5 had given up on him. You know, he was always clinging to like alphabet cards. Towards the intro of the book, they're talking about how he always had these alphabet cards with him because he loved like reading in the alphabet, and his preschool teachers were telling his parents, you know, take these away from him. He's probably never even going to know how to read, or just like completely giving up on him at a very young age. And it's just about the resilience of Christine, the mom, the author, and being like, you know, no, I believe in my son. I believe there's something great in him, which was great that there was something in him. You know, he ended up being a very brilliant child. She pulled him out of school, ran her own like daycare business. Well, not a business because she wouldn't take money, which she made a point many times to say she will not take money. She's a very charitable person. And she basically raised him on his own, stimulated on his own, and it's kind of frustrating how she praises herself for it, which, all power to parents of autistic children. I can't even begin to fathom how difficult that would be, but, she never gave up. She, found ways to stimulate Jake and keep him engaged, and that was ultimately what ended up saving him, where he was able to be vocal. He's a non-vocal child. He wouldn't talk to anybody. She kind of retrained him almost to, by the time he got into first grade, was, responding in class, sitting, kind and calmly, functioning like a quote-unquote normal kid would, because that was the big concern of the school system, is that he was going to have to be in these different learning environments because of his autism and his condition. They described it as like a severe autism. And this was in, I believe, the early 90s, so right at the beginning of what she describes as the autism epidemic, where it was regarded as a spectrum, because before, or really at this time, it was in the middle of the transition to where you were either, severely autistic or not. It was before there was really a spectrum kind of established. So she just describes how, once he was stimulated, he just kind of took off from there. He had his moments where school just wasn't keeping him entertained because he was so ahead, that he kind of started to regress at times, but ended up, when he was in 4th or 5th grade, very young age, ended up sitting in on college physics and aerospace classes at IUPUI, I think, which is like a tech institute in Indiana where they're from. And he ended up going to, I think, 3 different colleges before he was 13. And he, just a brilliant kid that ended up, he had some record for the youngest student to have a graduate research award for some physics theory that he discovered himself. Just genius kid. But the book, I feel like, as much as it's supposed to be about him, there is a lot of parenting advice in here, which I am not a parent, cannot relate to it, but there is a couple good things about resilience, which I have a few bookmarked that I can get back to. But the writing in the book was something that kind of really set me back from taking anything out of it, because of how much self-praising there is by Christine Barnett. She was this mom that wouldn't accept money, and so they were living paycheck to paycheck, and she would be getting supplies for her school and her daycare basically donated to her. Just all these barely making ends meet that she would talk about, but just didn't really line up with some of her expenses that she was also discussing, like buying college textbooks on a whim. And I know college textbooks are not cheap, so if you have to live off of ramen for dinner, I don't think you're buying physics textbooks. But I don't want to immediately discredit everything else in the book, but it is hard, especially with the reputation that Christine Barnett has now as a not convicted criminal, but was battling.
You mentioning it in class about how she was not a good person.
Yeah, battling in child abandonment charges.
Oh my God.
After it was actually found out through later research while she was writing this book, that her and her husband adopted a child from Romania with severe dwarfism. Some controversy with the child, did or didn't lie about their age. So she divorced her husband and moved to Canada, left the kid there by itself. And, I'm not one to be judge, jury, executioner, but I think that kind of invalidates being a spectacular parent. But
yes.
All that aside, if you take apart this outside reputation and kind of the fishy things and her poor writing, there is a lot in here that is good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she talks about how important it is to, you know your child, you love your child, do what is best for them. One thing that I had read as well, and criticism of it, was of parents that read this book that had autistic children, and read this book kind of expecting to have some life-changing savior moment, when there is that sad reality that not all children with autism are child prodigies and are going to be geniuses. And, you know, there's this message in the book that you can really accomplish anything, and as long as you don't give up on your dreams and your child. And you know, I know I've used the word resilience a lot, but it's just, that's really her theme that she keeps drilling in. But there's one really good quote, I'll find it shortly, but it was something along the lines of, autism is not, I flipped right to it. You don't win, okay, I guess I didn't flip to it, but you don't win autism. You know, it's not a battle that you wake up one day and conquered. It's a daily battle to get out of bed, go through life, go through your day. And, you know, she does make a point to that, but she also does kind of make it sound like if you just do the right things and never give up, you know, do everything she says, that your child is going to be A-okay. When and, you know, she even describes other children in the book that she saved, which I don't doubt, but it gives kind of a false hope to this idea that, you know, children with autism, as long as you do the right things, are going to be just fine, because, you know, some aren't going to be able to overcome those obstacles and are going to be, you know, kind of have to battle that severe autism that they were originally diagnosing Jake with. And that's not something that is just, you can wake up one day and be done with, which I wish would have addressed in this book. But yeah, great kid. You know, if you take everything at face value, an amazing story of parenting and family values.
I will just say, from hearing that, although, like you said, all props to her for being a mother, and dealing with a condition that I'm sure isn't easy to handle on a daily basis. At the same time, it does sound like she's almost trying to fluff up like this savior complex. Like, without her, what would he have been able to do? Or just like for parents in general, where it's almost like discrediting the kids and everything they have to battle with and deal with. And it's also like just sort of giving all that credit to the parents in a way. I mean, I didn't read the book, but
and I mean, I would implore, I didn't like it, but I would implore people to read the book, because there is a lot of good message in there. That reminded me, when you said about, you know, taking the credit to the parents, there was also a lot of criticism I had with the book regarding the way she spoke about Michael, her husband, Jake's dad, because he was a supporter of keeping him in school, you know, going through the system kind of as it's recommended by medical professionals. And I think he was kind of villainized through the book with that, which kind of, I mean, you know, in Jake's case, thank goodness they pulled him out and did everything they did, because, you know, he's this genius that is, you know, could very well win a Nobel Peace Prize, as professors in the book say. But, you know, not everybody should do that. Not all kids are going to be, you know, autistic or not, are going to benefit from being. Yeah,
and you shouldn't be shamed for doing what other people have, like especially medical professionals have suggested.
Yeah, and you know, she's medical professionals have also come a long way. This book was written in 2013, but the story, I believe, was late 90s, early 2000s, when this was all occurring. So he was born in 1998. And, you know, since 1998, medical experimenting and knowledge of autism has come a very long way. So, you know, I would urge people who do read this book seeking advice of parenting children, you know, go with your gut and do what you think is best, but don't just ignore medical professionals because someone told you to. That happened to get lucky. And again, it's not like she got it's not like she got lucky. It's the story of Jake, and I don't think he got lucky. You know, he was born with this awful condition that he ended up turning into a really beautiful story. But you know, all kudos to the mom for helping him through that. But that's his battle.
I promise I'm just looking up something.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
That's his battle that he wakes up every day and conquers. You know.
I was gonna say, what I just looked up is the definition of savant, because I was like, isn't that usually what they call children with autism who end up being like, I guess, geniuses?
Yeah.
And I feel like there is some sort of like notion that it's like, well, if you have an autistic child, on the bright side, they could end up being a savant, which is like a very rare thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like different depictions in media have almost made it like people, like parents of children with autism, almost believe like, well, it isn't completely bad. Like they could end up being a savant, which is almost like just such a rare case scenario.
Yeah.
And there's, I would be interested to read. I mean, like, I'll probably check out that book as well, but I would be interested to read from the perspective of a parent of a child with autism who isn't like a savant, someone who deals with a child who's like, who lies somewhere else on that spectrum.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because she actually did reference a few times in the book, because, you know, right before this time period was when Rain Man was very popular, and because of Rain Man and how, you know, kind of well known of a movie it is, there was that that stigma around people with autism that, you know, oh, well, they can be geniuses, which they can, yes. But that's not the case for everybody, and I think it would be really interesting to read accounts from people that were not geniuses. You know, she had a very large circle towards the end of the book of other parents with autism, but all of their kids had conquered, quote unquote, the big struggles that these professionals were telling them they were never going to be able to overcome. And, you know, there was never any, you know, despite the best efforts, this child is still suffering from the setbacks of autism. And, you know, this is how the parents deal with that. This is how the child deals with that. That's really something that I thought would be interesting to read. And, you know, she even had a second kid that had severe health problems where he couldn't eat like solid food. So he's like 3 or 4 years old or something. He overcame that as well, which obviously a far different story than autism. But, you know, everything in the book is overcoming, and there's never any facing of, you know, like they kind of wrestle with, oh, how are we going to face this? But they never have to. Which, good for them, but I think it would be really interesting to read that perspective as well. I'm interested that since we both have books about kind of, not as much, I know mine is a story about her son, yours is a story to his son, but I think it's interesting to see kind of this comparison of parenthood, and how kind of teaching your child your battles and your struggles of what you went through to better their future. I know, again, we have very different themes in our books, and, you know, I wouldn't argue one has more or less adversity, because, you know, there's no quantifiable way to distinguish between that, but
absolutely.
I think it's interesting with the facets of diversity that we've talked about in class, be it race, be it, you know, age, sex, gender, or disability or ability. You know, the kind of experiences that other people are able to share about how they conquered that is what allows other people to conquer that. And, you know, I just think it's always something that's very insightful to read about, of, you know, yours is a story about a guy telling his son how he, you know, battled with the drawbacks of being of a minority race, and kind of the social, you know, societal racism, like you were talking, structure.
Is it
You know.
alright if I touch on it a bit more?
Yeah, go for it.
Because one of the parts that I really liked in this is that he acknowledges that even though he's been trying his best for his son, he acknowledges that in the Black community there tends to be an absence of fathers. Like he straight up says, like, your grandma, your mom, like there are people who have just like grew up without fathers, and it's a very common thing. And he said that he wanted to be there for his son. And one of the things that he acknowledges is that there's a lot of beliefs and a lot of things that he has done that he feels like hasn't been good for his son. And he acknowledges that a lot of the things that he has taught his son has sort of arisen out of fear, and that he is just so protective of his son that he's sort of trying to raise him in the same way he was raised, where he wants his son to be cautious. And there's like one particular part that really got me emotional, and I don't know if I bookmarked it, but he said that it was like, I think one of the first days he dropped his kid off at a daycare, and his son went like running out to play with the other kids, and with no hesitation, no apprehension, he just ran out to play with the other kids, and they were jumping and tumbling all over the place. And he said deep in his gut, he just wanted to go to his son and say, like, how are you able to be comfortable with these people that you don't know so quickly? Like, you need to be careful, you need to be cautious. But then he sort of reevaluated, and he's like, it's a good thing that these kids don't care that his son is Black. You know, they're all just getting along and playing together, and there's no worry about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it reminded me of a part where Robbie mentioned in class that once I got to the part where they were, where is it? Right here. This is the movie theater part where he discussed it. So he writes to his son that he took him to go see like Howl's Moving Castle in West Village, New York, when he was very, very young. And after they had got out of the movie theater, and keep in mind, one of the things that he pointed out is that they were in West Village, which is more of a predominantly like white, affluent neighborhood, while he, I think, lived in Harlem at that time, or the Harlem area. So he did feel out of his comfort zone immediately, being in a predominantly wealthy white area. And so he talks about when they leave the movie theater, this older white woman sort of pushes his son out of the way and says, like, come on. And so immediately as a father, he got defensive. One gets defensive over their child. Yeah. And he tried standing up to her, sort of being like, he tried standing up to her, and he like picked up his son and was, I guess, like questioning her. And then she ended up getting a crowd of white people, like they were all standing up for her and supporting her, even though she was the one who basically shoved his child. Yeah. And he said that after he started seeing how many like other white bystanders were sort of sticking up for her, he sort of shrunk back and realized that like this wasn't, you know, other people are afforded the privilege of even being able to stand up for their children. But for him, it's sort of like they're supposed to shrink back and allow these people to sort of get away with these rude actions. Yeah. And one of the parts I bookmarked is when he said, I came home shook. It was a mix of shame for having gone back to the law of the streets mixed with rage. I could have you arrested, which is to say I could take your body. Because one of the bystanders was threatening to call the police on him for defending his son. Which, Rabbi pointed it out for a good reason, where it's sort of like it makes you realize that things as simple as defending your child, in their case, it's like the immediate threat is we're going to call the police. And knowing the history of police violence with minorities in this country, it's like that is a threat. That is a threat against his life. All for standing up for his son. And like I said, there's it is really poignant to see like how much he cares about his son. And I just felt like this, like I wish I could have a father like this, because he really just wants the best for his son. Yeah. He wants his son to grow up in a world where he doesn't have to revert to the law of the street, or revert to some sort of like inherent fear that he feels like is passed on from generation to generation. Yeah. He wants like a better future for his son. And I guess because we're running out of time here, I just wanted to, there's a part where he's talking about how he talks about, where was it? he talks about visiting France and how it was something that so it says like France as one might regard Jupiter, something that felt like out of this world, something that he would never, a place where he would never go. And it's very interesting to hear him talk about France, where it's almost like all of the weight that comes with living in America almost like expelled from his body, because there was sort of like an acceptance, and it felt like people were sorry jump scare but people were more jovial. There was like an air of just people being happy, people being free, people playing ball on the streets and not having to worry about, obviously there are problems with racism in France, of course.
Sure. Yeah.
But he was just talking about how it had felt like a relief for him, talking about how I'm so sorry. I'm like how the mother of his child, I'm pretty sure that's his wife still, that she had, I guess, fell in love with these notions of the world, of everything else. While for him, it felt like he was trapped in the U.S. and like it would never be a reality for him. And again, I guess one last thing I wanted to mention is, like I said, the concentration on the body. There's a lot of visceral imagery in this, and so when he's talking about how when he's talking about his friend Prince's death, he says, "I believed and still do that our bodies are ourselves, that my soul is the voltage conducted through neurons and nerves, and that my spirit is my flesh. Prince Jones was a one of one, and they had destroyed his body, scorched his shoulders and arms, ripped open his back, mangled lung, kidney, and liver. I sat there feeling myself a heretic, believing only in this one-shot life in the body. And for the crime of destroying the body of Prince Jones." Like, it is such a beautiful book. I can't stress that enough. It is gorgeous, and there's something about, of course, since he's a poet, just so eloquent.
Yeah.
And it's just, when you read it, you can feel the passion and emotion he's writing with. And it, of course, it's amplified by the fact that he's writing to his son, someone that he cares so much about. And yeah, I feel like we could talk about these books like all day. So
yeah, I'll say I wanted to read, I found that quote, but I wanted to respond to yours first. I just, between, I think, the story of France, or his account of France, that's just always something that I've wondered, because I've never really been able to leave the Northwest. And I know, I'm a straight white guy. I don't get faced with a lot of adversity. But, it's always something that's kind of blown my mind. When you were saying about with his kid, where his kid ran into, just went right in to go play with other kids. And, you always hear all those stories of little kids that are like, oh, I want a Barbie, and, they don't care if it's like a black Barbie or a white Barbie. And it's something that I've never been able to wrap my head around, of where does this hate come from? Be it from race, racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, whatever the ism is. I've never been able to understand, where that comes from, and it's got to be.
It's so nurture.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there is no way to argue nature for that kind of thing, because there's no way that as like a 4-year-old you're going up to someone without any outside influence and being like, I don't like you because of this.
Yeah.
Those are like all things that are taught to you, whether it's through media, whether it's through your parents. It's like.
Yeah. And that's just the thing is, there's parents out there that, they're going to teach their kids or influence their kids to hate. And then, I can only begin to understand what it's like to be a parent of color, or really of any minority group, that, you have to tell your kid one day that they are going to be hated and marginalized just because of the way that they are. And that just, it's shattering, really. And I'm very fortunate that I didn't have to have that conversation with my parents, but just that going back to that innocence that children have, that's their nature, is to just accept everything and not see anyone by their whatever group they belong to, yet it still comes out because of their nurture, and that's just it's awful. But
I'll just mention one last thing.
Yeah.
One last thing before we go to your quote. He mentions, this is like a very big part when talking about generational trauma, is that he mentions sort of for him it was Prince, his friend Prince at Howard, that got, brutalized. He got killed. And for his son, he said, I think when his son was like 13, he heard the verdict about Mike Brown. He heard the verdict about Mike Brown, and he said, like, I need to go. And he said that it, like, I think it really impacted him when he heard his son, like, I need to go, to sort of, like, process the fact that Mike Brown's killers were, like, not indicted. They just got away. And I think it was a moment where he realized that it would hurt, like, seeing that sort of brutality would hurt for his son as much as it hurt him. And while there were other things that his son got to experience that he didn't really, like, his son didn't have to grow up with the whole, like, law of the streets. His son didn't really have to grow up with certain peers being as horribly racist. But at the same time, there are systematic problems in the U.S. that he will have to deal with, and it is that generational trauma. And he does have to deal with, like, the limitations of their race, and he has to deal with, I guess, the reality of police brutality, which is such a horrible... It's, like, it hurt me to read it, and it hurt to... it's almost like by proxy, just hearing about the pain of his son and knowing as a parent that that's something that he's going to have to address. And I think he really tried to address it in this book. It's really profound, and it's just like, I admire it.
Yeah, that's, I wish I had a profound book like that. No. I did really like this quote, and it's right towards the end of the book. And it's about what I was saying about, winning that every day. And I think it's in the context of autism, but, it's really something that can be applied to anything. But it was, Christine says, for years we'd thought of ourselves as living in the shadow of Jake's autism diagnosis. Now we have a different perspective. Jake is still autistic. His autism is not something he has overcome, but something he overcomes every day. He is still acutely sensitive to all sorts of things, though completely unnoticed by the rest of us. Takes pride in the ways in which he is different, and given the chance to drop the label, he has chosen to keep it. And I think that was really, like, the biggest takeaway that I got was, I know that is a little bit more in how she describes it applicable to autism, where he's still affected by these things, but he chooses to accept those drawbacks and still go to that battle every day, because he doesn't really else have a choice. You either got to succumb to it or conquer it every day, and, he's chosen to conquer it every day and has achieved these incredible feats at, like, 12 that I'm not even doing at 20. And, I think that's just something that you can apply to really any diversity group where, you can... I know it's a little different in some situations where, like with race, you can't just choose to not be profiled by police. But, you can... still, and it's hard for me to say this as a white person, like I'm trying to tell people what to do, but kind of what I got out of that was, of any minority group, you can choose to just kind of live in that label, or you can just wake up and do your best, kind of despite that.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the things in this book that he covers is that despite all of the very sad, very tragic imagery, all of the sad circumstances, he still manages to uplift and find so much beauty in their experience and so much beauty in their identity and culture. Yeah. Like, yes, of course, there's going to be horrible parts associated with it. There's going to be nasty, vitriolic racism, of course. But at the same time, he found himself at Howard. He considered it the Mecca. He saw so many beautiful varieties of people. Yeah. He saw different people embracing different things. When he went to New York, he saw different, interracial pairs of, like, which he's never seen before. And he sort of brings out the beauty in their understanding. Like, there's one part where he mentions at TSA, I think he bumped into some guy, and it was another black man, and the man just said, "You straight." And he said that it was a moment where he felt like he was safe because he was with someone who was like him, someone who understood him. There was a culture, there was a connection there, all conveyed through 2 words. Yeah. And it's like, I would say that my sort of like the message of this is very similar to yours in the idea of resilience and how it's important to sort of wake up every day and sort of deal with the things that life handles you, but still find the beauty in all of it. And he really just sort of drives in that despite there's all of these horrible, awful things, there's so much beauty and there's so much to be appreciative of, and there's going to be people that you meet that will make it all worth it, and there will be experiences that you have that, like, for him, he said that he never thought France would be all that, and then he went and he loved it, and he wanted to take it and share it with his son, because he also wanted to have his son, like, experience that. I'm redundant saying the word beauty, but it is beautiful. And it's,
I can see that.
Yeah.
Well, I think you did your book justice. You know,
I mean, you did as well. I learned a lot.
I know I spent more time complaining about mine than praising the good stuff.
Wrong with that.
Yeah, but you know, I think I have taken away a lot out of yours, and it's something I definitely want to read.
Me as well.
I'm just like thirsting for good writing, because this is just from some lady that just wanted to tell her son's story. It was a great story to tell, but you know, anyone can be a good mom. Not everyone can be a good writer. That's something I took out of that.
I think that's a nice note to leave off on.
Close on that.